So we're going to move to the Q&A now. And the first one goes out to Kim. Kim, I think I heard you say in your presentation, if I heard you right, that that you, in an earlier life, tried to kill football in Minnesota.
I did.
And so everyone's dying to know, first of all, how did you do that? And secondly, given recent events, do you think it was just an idea that was ahead of its time?
It was an idea. So as, in part of my practice, I chair our nonprofit works group, and I'm heavily involved in nonprofit governance at the ABA level and the local level. And I was asked to work on a national seminar on concussion law and how concussions impact youth organizations. And so I wrote a paper, and a lot of people started to reach out to me like, well, what are we going to do now in Minnesota? Should we get rid of hockey? Should we get rid of football? Because all these kids are getting concussions. And so luckily I wasn't successful. I wasn't really trying to kill football, but that's really where that came from. And somehow, if you can link concussions with nonprofit governance, you can get to, I have a way of getting things put together that don't make a lot of sense, but they end up resulting in interesting output. So
Great. Well, thank you for that. So one of the questions is, and this is a popcorn for anybody on the panel, but what are some big ideas that people can rally around for taking social enterprise to the next level in Minnesota? It could be ideas for social enterprises or how to advance the sector. We'll start at Dave, I guess.
Sure, I'll take a swing at it. And Brad had mentioned part of this in his presentation, but if you think of the transfer of wealth that's going to happen, of the trillions of dollars, and you look at the millennials of today and the youth, if you want to know where some of the demand is going into colleges and universities and postgraduate programs, that amount of wealth and resource, a good portion of it, I think, is going to be dedicated into the social enterprise space. And if you even take a lighter flavor of that, which is sometimes called conscious capitalism, it's going to have a massive effect.
So I think of a sector-specific example and then a broader one, and the sector-specific is education. I think education is past time for major disruption, both K-12 and higher ed, and it's just waiting for entrepreneurs to get a hold of it and find better ways to deliver education. And we've come to equate education with the current system. And it's just that it's a system that was devised and worked very well for a long time, but maybe doesn't work so great now. And so if you look at that through the eyes of an entrepreneur, you still have the same objective, but what are some different ways to make that happen? So that's an area that's ripe for disruption. More broadly, my personal hot button is the bringing philanthropy and investment together. Foundations sit on billions of dollars of endowments, and in the worst cases, those endowments are invested in things that work counter to their social mission. In the best cases, maybe they've disvested themselves of tobacco or guns or whatever, and they're not doing bad stuff, but there's still billions of dollars that could be put to active use in social businesses that create not just return for the endowment, but also social good. So that is happening, but a lot more of it needs to happen.
I think from my perspective, and I alluded to this earlier, I think that it's my job as a lawyer, especially as a mid-career lawyer, to educate the service providers, the lawyers, the politicians about what this really means and to not be fearful of it. And I probably spend 75% of my time trying to explain to lawyers or accountants or business professionals that are, CEOs that have been at it for 50 years, why change isn't that scary, and that sometimes change happens, and while we might have done something some way 50 years ago and yeah, it's not broken, it's okay for change. And I think we need to have people at certain levels who, like me, I'm not an entrepreneur at all. I might be able to solve Kevin's starfish problem, but I'm not an entrepreneur. But my job is to be an ambassador to the movement and provide the tools and the thought leadership to help those who are opposed kind of get comfortable with where things are going.
So this one, I think I'll direct it primarily to you, Kim, but anyone on the panel can type up. So I'm looking at the list of questions that people have submitted, and in 4 or 5 questions, and I experience the same thing when I'm going around the country, people are using interchangeably the phrase B Corp and Benefit Corp, and your presentation focused on Benefit Corp. And so I think that there's a little bit of confusion between Benefit Corp, the legal structure, and a B Corp or a certified B Corp. So can we kind of try once and for all to clear up that confusion? And I know that there's certified B Corps in the room who probably do understand the distinction, but once and for all, can we try to clear up that little bit of confusion?
I can't claim I'll get it done once and for all, since I field this question about 3 or 4 times a day. B Labs is a nonprofit organization out of Pennsylvania that is a certifier of a certain way of doing business. And if they certify a business, and Dave's business is B Lab certified, Chris's is B Lab certified, there's probably other ones, that business, if it operates in a certain way and it does this survey and it gets a certain number of points, it could be a for-profit, a nonprofit, it's any sort of enterprise that goes through this survey, this review, and if they pass a certain level, they can refer to themselves, so they can get B Lab certified. And that's called B certification. And it's like a good housekeeping seal of approval that they can put on their website. They can hold themselves out that way. And that's what a B Lab certified company is, or a B certified company. A benefit corporation is a specific corporate form under state law that is based on our state law statutes, and you have to follow the state law statute in order to be a benefit corporation under state law. It's like being a nonprofit corporation or a for-profit corporation. That's what we colloquially call benefit corporations. And so there is confusion and there's also a benefit to being a benefit corporation, which gets even more confusing. So that's really the difference. If you think about it legally, or think about it sort of in buckets, one is a certification, one is a legal identity.
Right, so thank you for clearing that up. And then there were several questions that also referred to sort of the state of the nonprofit social enterprise. And if I'm not mistaken, the certified B Corp actually can't be applied for by a nonprofit, if I understand that correctly. But the bigger question was, in an environment in Minnesota where benefit corporations are going to be coming onto the field in a little bit of time, what is the expectation of how that will, and I'm paraphrasing several questions here, but what's the expectation of how that will affect the nonprofit social enterprise that Brad referred to on that spectrum? So in terms of where the attention goes and where the capital goes, do you expect an impact on that? And I'm going to leave that one for Brad to start.
I've heard this discussion several times, and I think there's an undercurrent of fear that if these public benefit corporations spring up, will they suck up all the money and leave the nonprofits high and dry? I think that's an unfounded fear. I've worked with investors, impact investors, and what I find is that they are philanthropic first. The way they got their money to give to philanthropy was they created some wealth somehow, and a lot of that involves investment, and they have kept those two worlds separate. And now with impact investment, they say, well, I can take some of my portfolio and put it into social businesses. I have never seen a case where that has made them say, oh, I'm going to give less charitably. It just doesn't happen. That's not the way their minds work. It's not either or, it's both and. So I feel very strongly it's nothing for the nonprofit sector to fear.
Kim?
I just want to jump in there because I think we once again are muddying terms. I haven't checked, and Debbie, you can maybe confirm this. I think B Labs will certify a nonprofit to be B certified. What I said is that a nonprofit cannot convert into a benefit corporation under our state statute. So we do not, because our benefit corporation statute is a for-profit business that has an additional social purpose. And so I get that question a lot too from I have a big nonprofit practice. A lot of my clients are nonprofits that actually have social enterprises. They've dropped down some sort of activity where they've got earned revenue and they're operating a business under that earned revenue stream. I don't see the benefit corporation impacting the ability of nonprofits to do that as well. Because they're apples and oranges in some ways. Now, they might be competing in the same sector, saying, okay, I'm going to drop down I have a nonprofit that dropped down a service, they recycle old computers and they use recent, released felons to do that. Well, you can do that on a for-profit side as well as on a nonprofit side. So the difference is not going to be threatened by the benefit corporation form.
Kim, what about a subsidiary, a wholly owned subsidiary of
Oh,
a
yeah.
nonprofit?
I have nonprofits that have dropped down for-profit wholly owned subsidiaries, and I have tax exempt nonprofits that drop down taxable nonprofits. And so there's much structuring that we can do. I have a big nonprofit right now. They're a $40-50 million a year operation. They want to earn a little bit more control on their revenue stream, so they're actively investigating how they can invest a little bit of money in a for-profit business as a subsidiary to augment their revenue stream. And they're really looking at all sorts of different ways of doing this. And so it's really a structuring question. It's not really a threat question.
Dave, you want to take one crack at
I
that?
do, one more slight crack, and not to overcomplicate it, but what's being discussed here, and Brad and Kimberly are talking about, is that in my maybe entrepreneurial mind, the creativity as to how you look at yourself from a corporate form, whether nonprofit, for-profit, cooperative, member-based. I recently was talking to banking organizations yesterday that are integrating trusts and foundations in a bank setting of all things, in which to facilitate their philanthropy out of that bank, and it's mixed in, and they have NGOs that attach onto the holding company, and for-profits and regulated entities and non-ones. So it can get massively complicated, but if you just calm your mind, it's just it's a blank canvas to play with to how you're going to accomplish your mission that you want to. So in the Kimberleys of the world are the ones that help you navigate that. I certainly am not. All I'm saying is that there is a wide spectrum of ways that you can organize to actually get the impact that you want, as well as the financially sustainable side.
Great. David, this next question is directed at you, and the question was posed: how do shareholders get comfortable with B Corp designation and less return to themselves? And that question was posed before we unpacked the difference between a benefit corporation and a certified B Corp, so you might want to take that into account in your reply. Maybe you're thinking of applying for benefit corporation on January 1st. But
sure.
The question again is, yeah, how do shareholders react to that?
I mean, obviously your shareholders have to be open to the idea of that they're not the first priority. They're on parity with whatever that company is going to say, whether it's the employees, the environment, the broader community, and whether that's a specific purpose filing or a general purpose filing. That's just the way that is going to be. In our organization, I guess we do have a luxury. I own the majority of it, and that's the way it's going to be. I have the luxury, too, of a father who grew up teaching business ethics in the 70s, who basically talked about the common good and talked about a corporation that having a social contract. So it was not a hard sell when I came to him and I said, we're going to become a certified B corporation, and then we're going to become, or B Corp, and then we're going to become a B corporation. And he said, whippersnapper, I was teaching this in the 70s, and it's about time you were able to formalize it. So everything isn't necessarily new here. But the fact is I think you'll find it is very important when you're forming an entity, if that's where you are, to get the proper structure and ownership in place, that you are mission aligned. Otherwise, you will have issues down the road. I think there's one other kind of aspect that the benefit corporation does or presents to not only your shareholders but your board, is some protections from a legal standpoint that profit maximizing isn't the only purpose of this entity, that
Right.
you can take into account other factors. And if you're a legal director and you have prudent man law to abide by, that you do have some flexibility to take into other factors other than maximizing profit for a shareholder.
I think
which
you
is
really hit on a really important point. Say to the folks that are controlling the questions in the back, they keep switching around on my screen, so if you could just leave them all up there, I'll try to get to them, but I'm getting dizzy. Okay, so jumping to another, kind of a whole nother question. Somebody raised the question, are General Mills and Medtronic social enterprises? They feed people and help people's health. Why are they not social enterprises? Or maybe they are, but that was the question.
Well, they are. I mean, it depends on how you label social, and if they provide jobs. Some people say providing jobs is a social good. And I talked about this earlier. The creation of the social enterprise sector does not make the pure for-profit sector evil or bad. People always ask me this when we were doing the legislation, well, wouldn't Target do this? Isn't Target already doing this? And I'm like, yes. I mean, Dayton, we come from the land of the Daytons. We come from the 5% Club. So we've had this happening in the state for a long time. And when Brad talks about us becoming the Silicon Valley, or, we have that ability, or Kevin says, the state of social enterprise. We already have organizations here that are doing that. We have Thrivent. We have so many organizations that are already doing this in their current form. And they're not going to switch because they're doing fine. But yeah, so don't try to put a bucket or a label when you're looking at these large multinational organizations.
So not a judgment call, right? Okay, another question. To confirm, there is absolutely no tax benefits for benefit corps under Minnesota law?
There is no tax benefit to benefit corporations under federal or state law.
Thank you. What role has cross-sector collaboration, private, public, private, nonprofit, played in social enterprise? And what are some examples that you're familiar with in Minnesota?
I'll keep this to a few minutes. I mean, I can just give you what my experience is, and that is they're happening all over the place. Obviously, as a regulated institution, we work with the government. They regulate us from a bank standpoint, but we also are a part of a community development financial institution certification, which allows us to access some dollars and some tax credits to do redevelopment in very highly distressed census tracts. We've partnered with Lutheran Social Services on the Eastside Financial Center in which to provide education and counseling. We've partnered with the City of St. Paul on what was called the Neighborhood Lending Partnership, in which to essentially give low-income people access to credit so they could purchase a business and fix it up and start running and hire folks. There's no end to it, I think, in terms of the intersections and the collaborations that can take place. As a matter of fact, the social enterprise route in terms of what I've seen to ones that are just lighting it on fire around the world, they are collaborating in spaces you can't even imagine. In the corporate, whether it's an IT company with education, the combination is endless in terms of that in terms of the synergies that go on there. And in some cases, bedfellows get pretty strange. Somebody who's creating the environmental problem is working with the environmental company to clean it up, and they're now collaboratively addressing the problem. And they used to not talk, and now they're collaborating on a solution. It's phenomenal. I'll stop at that, but I think you just have to keep the canvas open and look for where you can build capacity and capabilities in terms of what your mission impact wants to be.
Great, thank you. Brad, what is the critical mass of impact investing capital that you feel is needed to substantially move social enterprise in Minnesota to the Silicon Valley of social enterprise?
That would be $103,987,000.
Billion.
Dave, you can take care of that.
So one of the peculiar things you see in Silicon Valley is how capital circulates in that community. So David starts a new company, he makes it big, he cashes out. He doesn't now start investing in other places. I come to him and say, hey Dave, look at the back of my napkin, I got some great ideas. He takes his capital, invests in my business, the same thing happens to me. The capital is very sticky in Silicon Valley. It stays there and it grows on itself. So that's part of what needs to happen here too. And in order for that to happen, there needs to be acknowledgement among the people who hold capital, individuals and institutions, that this is a legitimate sector in which to invest. And up until fairly recently, if you ask an investment advisor, let's say you had a wealth, you were a wealth advisor to a family that had some money, and they said to you, I want to invest in this social business. They would throw red flags, say, it's my fiduciary responsibility to direct you away from that, that's risky, the returns are lousy, and frankly, in a lot of cases, without really understanding the truth behind that. Well, what you're finding among people who advise wealthy people is their clients are driving them toward a different approach. They're saying, I want to take some of my wealth and put it to work for social good, and you need to help me find out how to do that. And there are markets and tools to do that. So part of the answer is how do you get that critical mass is the institutional bias against social enterprise has to shift. And I think it is, but it's still underway.
Great. One other thing I would add on that is you might want to speak before you leave here today with Chris Hansen, Scott Cole, anybody from the Twin Cities chapter of Social Enterprise Alliance. They're working pretty actively on trying to aggregate a sort of a crowdfunding basis for impact investing in Minnesota. I know they've had a number of meetings and putting together some plans. If you're interested in that idea of how capital gets to the sector and how you can participate in that, speak to them about, raise your hands, guys, just so they know who we're talking about, so that you can talk about them. We had a couple questions that
Before you
related
go on, Kevin, just a point of clarification, and you can get more of this information from these guys, but when we talk about crowdfunding, you're probably most familiar with the type of crowdfunding I'm starting. I'm going to do an independent film, and if you send me $5,000, you get to be at the premiere. You're not buying into the equity of my company. It's just an exchange. It's essentially a charitable contribution. But there's a spin on that, and there's been some attempts that have been stonewalled, frankly, by the SEC to allow you to do that, to invest in businesses.
With equity.
With equity. And to do it without being what's called an accredited investor, which is a certain level of wealth. And if that ever happens, that would open up trillions of dollars of additional capital for investment in social enterprises. And that's what they're working on.
And there is legislation, Kim has been helping with this as well, that will be introduced this session to have a Minnesota equity crowdfunding legislation, so we can do it here in Minnesota without having to deal with the SEC as well.
So it has potentially truly revolutionary impact, could have.
And I don't know if it's going to pass this year, so don't look at me like if it doesn't, it's not my fault.
It's all up to you, Kim.
It's all my fault. You didn't come to me early enough. But also at the federal level, where the crowdfunding, the SEC, well, the Jobs Act endorsed or created crowdfunding. The SEC has been very slow to pass that, to get that moving along. We now have proposed legislation, which we're calling crowdfunding 2.0, at the federal level, which may move this a little bit faster if it ever goes through. We don't know if it's going to go through. Nothing's going to go through in the next year. So, but stay tuned. Something might happen. We don't know.
That wraps it up, folks. We are out of time. It's been a fantastic conversation. I want to thank the panelists and thanks everyone in the audience who gave them their attention as well as your good questions.